I know what you're thinking, and you're right.
You might say it's all fair to do online research and you can look at what it says on the internet, but what is it like actually being there at Tenerife, in northwestern Tenerife? What is it like actually being there? Well, you're absolutely right, and that is the substance of this analysis.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most sensible community in true crime. Now, Jay's friends joined the search a couple of days ago, and one of the things they said was, we were falling when we were up there. Jay's best friends are warehouse worker James Curry, 19 years old. One of the things he said was, we have got to keep on hoping that he's out there somewhere. We can't give up on him. It's as if a piece of us is missing. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. Welcome to the hundreds, it might be a couple of thousand of you now who have subscribed. Welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. There's also a lot of content on here on Madeleine McCann, JonBenet Ramsey, Lucy Letby. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, sensible, interesting, please like, share, leave a comment. You can, if you hit the thanks button, it's a little icon with a $sign on it. You can leave a little donation if you like, give me a cup of coffee, and let's get started. And so he goes on to say, this is his best friend. This is James Curry, also 19, Jay's best friend, a warehouse worker. He says, he's my best friend. I love him to bits. We all do. And I can tell you, if it was one of us missing, he would be out there looking for us. Quite a nice sentiment. He also says, this sort of thing doesn't happen to a lad from Lancashire. It's like something from Netflix. Now, actually, his mother said that something like this has happened. I don't mean someone just disappearing. I just mean something not very kosher, in the sense that his mother's actually just released information that when he was a boy, he was actually, I think, mugged on the street. And so, you know, there's the sense of Tenerife being this sort of criminal, drug-infested backcountry. Well, there is crime kind of everywhere. And Jay was actually a victim of crime in his own town when he was 12 years old. In any event, his best friend, James Curry, says this is like something from Netflix. Now, I'm not sure what he means by that, because you did have the series on Madeleine McCann on Netflix. I hope he's not referring to that. But anyway, he goes on to say also, he's on his first holiday with his friends and he goes missing. It just doesn't make sense. Now, again, I don't know if it is like something from Netflix, because Netflix isn't real life. This is real life. And them going there, going to Tenerife, actually going to the area, that is real life. And I really don't know whether when standing there, looking at those massives, looking at this extraordinary landscape, it's a landscape that's not common even on our planet. You know, it's the third largest volcano in the world. I think I've climbed the second highest, which is Kilimanjaro. I think one's got to differentiate between tallest volcanoes and largest, because there is a difference. But the point is, it is it's an idiosyncratic landscape. And so this is real life. And so when you're faced with this really extreme landscape, unusual landscape, impressive landscape, vertiginous landscape, do you look at it and say, I think he was taken, I think he's been kidnapped? Well, I think some people do, and it's possible. I mean, the whole notion that his phone got from A to B as quickly as it does suggest that he got into a car and that he was hitchhiking. And Lucy actually said that she would have expected that. She would have expected him to try and thumb down a ride. if he was in trouble. And I would not have a problem with that. I think that is likely, but his phone was found not on the road, on a path. Now, Jessica Ingham, Jay's ex, said the following: "Seeing the terrain for ourselves, we realized just how harsh it is up there, but we have to keep hoping that he is out there somewhere." Now, obviously, as every day goes by, the likelihood of survival, unfortunately, diminishes. She goes on to say, "The place is covered in cactus and paths are slippery and rocky." It's exactly what I've been saying. And then it was her, Jessica Ingham, who said, "We were falling when we were up there, and to think our friend is up there is just so upsetting." And I don't really think, I don't know, I don't really think they were there early in the morning, although who knows, but we do know he was there early in the morning. And that is the case I've been making in the previous video, that it very likely was slippery and rocky. He very likely did fall, and here we hear from them that they did fall. Now, when asked about the possibility of Jay being taken, Jessica immediately said, "I'm convinced of it. I don't see how there's been no sign of him. It makes me think someone has him." Okay, so yeah, you do have someone confronted with this incredibly sheer landscape saying, "Wow, look at these incredibly tall mountains." Okay, I think he was kidnapped. So it is possible. Those are the two scenarios. But I do want to deal with another aspect, which is why we overestimate our competence. And this is not to point a finger at anyone. It's not to point a finger at Jay. It's not to point a finger at his friends. It's not to point a finger at the police. It's not to point a finger at David Larkin. It's basically something just to think about, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which sort of deals with the less I'm qualified, the more I overestimate my competence. The more I'm qualified, the more I underestimate my competence. And what that's really saying is it's almost like the more educated you are, or the more mature you are, or the more you know about a particular subject, the less, and it's in a way counterintuitive, the less confident you are in something where you should have more confidence. But it shows how the ego tends to inflate confidence artificially when you don't know anything about a particular subject matter. Now, I do think many of you seem to think that the idea that this is an accident is a very simple kind of interpretation, and that the other one is superior because it is far more complicated and full of intrigue and all of those things. And that is why I want to take us into the area of social psychology and specifically why we overestimate our competence. I want to think about it with regard to this case, but I also want to think about it with regard to perhaps certain politicians, what you hear from them, also people in the true crime community that are extremely confident about what they're saying, but are they actually, do they have any kind of credentials? Now, I want to quote from an article. It's titled, "Why We Overestimate Our Competence," from apa.org. I'll put a link to that in the description. It's fascinating. And it deals with this whole thing, written or interviewing basically the authors of the Dunning-Kruger hypothesis. Listen to this, quote, "It's surprising how often feedback is non-existent or ambiguous." That's what Dunning says. What's his first name? See if I can find it here. David Dunning, PhD. Doctor is a social psychologist, and he is from Cornell University. He says, "The tendency that people have to overrate their abilities fascinates David Dunning, PhD. People overestimate themselves, but more than that, they really seem to believe it. I've been trying to figure out where that certainty of belief comes from." So this is not to judge anyone, simply to understand this aspect of human psychology. And so he says, it's surprising how often feedback is non-existent or ambiguous. He says, "It's a pretty safe assumption that what people say to our face is more positive than what they're saying behind our backs. People also overestimate themselves out of ignorance." And think about that in terms of nature. You go into nature. Why are you overestimating yourself? Well, you don't even know that you are, because you're entering a terrain that you're just unfamiliar with, but you are ignorant of. Dunning also says, take the ironic example of an elderly man who thinks he's an excellent driver, but is a hazard on the road. And I'm starting to feel like my dad maybe shouldn't be driving as much. He's still a pretty good driver, but at what point do you sort of, I don't know. And then also the woman who reads a book about the stock market and is ready to compete with a professional stockbroker. Dunning, in the next paragraph of this article, Dunning is addressing some of these self-overestimation issues empirically, so scientifically, in a series of studies reported in the December 1999 Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. It is fairly dated, but it is also pretty impressive and influential. He and co-author Dunning-Kruger, also a PhD, he was then a Cornell graduate student and now an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'm not sure exactly where that is. They examined the idea that ignorance is at the root of some self-inflation. Do you agree with that? Cornell students received short tests in humor, grammar, and logic, then assessed how well they thought they did, both individually and in relation to other Cornell students. In all three areas, students who performed the worst greatly overestimated their performance compared to those who actually did well. Now, here's a thought, a very revolutionary, even kind of blasphemous idea. I don't know if that's the right word. And it is, are people overestimating their ability to think about this case, those who are in terms of the foul play narrative? Are those more informed people or not? Just food for thought. What do you think about that? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.